Everybody. Welcome. Very excited to get to hear what TexProtects has to say about our upcoming legislative session. My name is Jesse Boer. I'm the COO here at DePelchin Children's Center. Many of you know DePelchin. I won't run through our spiel, but we do a lot of work in the prevention space, and a lot of that work is amplified in partnership with TexProtects. And with the Texas Child Welfare Funders who are helping to sponsor this event. This is a really unique time in the history of child welfare. We have a lot of things happening, a lot of things that are moving, a lot of things that are set to move even further or possibly move in different directions as a result of this upcoming legislative session. So this is going to be a really important one that we will be paying a lot of attention to, one that we will be monitoring very, very closely. And Houston in particular has got a lot of chips on the table when it comes to what's going on with this legislative session. The DFPS just released their fiscal year 2022 data, and there were a lot of things that happened statewide and in Houston that were concerning trends, things that we hope the legislature is going to be paying attention to, things that we hope our advocacy community like TexProtects is going to be paying attention to, and that we're confident that we'll be seeing a lot of movement on. One that I want to point out and that I want us to keep in mind, given that our focus today is really around the prevention space. In fiscal year 2022, over 80% of investigations with a confirmed instance of abuse or neglect were closed by CPS in Harris County with no follow-up services whatsoever. That number is a little bit lower statewide, and it varies by region, but for the Houston region, again, 80% of cases with a confirmed instance of abuse or neglect were closed with no follow-up. This to me highlights the ever-expanding role of child maltreatment, child abuse and neglect prevention services, and it's something that's going to be, again, especially important when we look to advocating to the legislature in this upcoming session. So I'm very excited about the discussion we're going to have today. I'm very excited to learn more. Again, I'm grateful for our partners at TexProtects and the Texas Child Welfare Funders and Philanthropy Southwest. This is a great group, and I'm excited to get to the discussion part. So Jordan, with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, and we can get started.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Jordan Watson. I'm the VP of Policy and Government Affairs at TexProtects. Really appreciate you all joining us today. And thank you, DePelchin, for being such a great partner for the Houston stop on our Texas tour. So just to kind of level set, we really enjoyed hearing from you all last year on what was going on in your communities and what you felt was the most pressing issues for your community. We've taken the time to consider those and to put our policy priorities in order for the legislative session. And so we kind of consider this the part two or the follow-up from the discussion we had last year so that we can present our legislative priorities to you and also hear about again, what's going on in your communities and kind of how these policy priorities will affect or can interact with what's going on in your communities. So we really want this to be interactive. We're going to take some time to present what we're planning on being proactive on at the legislature in the upcoming session. But we, again, really want to hear about how that impacts your community and where you think we can be focused or where you think we can be most supportive with the legislature in the upcoming session. So I just want to take a quick minute to thank our sponsor, the Texas Child Welfare Funders, and I'll also introduce today's representative from the Texas Child Welfare Funders, Christine Gendron, who is the board president and the vice president, board president of Texas Child Welfare Funders and VP of KPG Family Foundation. She's worked in the child welfare field for 15 years as a consultant and as the ED of a statewide provider association, and as a VP for a multi-state child welfare agency, and as a foster parent. So without further ado, Christine Gendron, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Jordan. Like Jordan said, my name is Christine Gendron, and I'm the vice president of a small family foundation called KPG Family Foundation. We were based in Houston for quite some time. We're now based in Dallas, but we fund services for kids and families across the state. I'm here today in my role as president of Texas Child Welfare Funders. The mission of Texas Child Welfare Funders is to optimize the child welfare system to ensure the best possible outcomes for the children and families involved. We are essentially a free group for funders who are investing in child welfare, are interested in learning more, to share information, to network, to learn from each other, to collaborate, that kind of thing. One of many things that we do is we partner with organizations like TexProtects that are leaders in advancing child welfare in Texas. We recently partnered with TexProtects to create a Child Welfare 101 webinar for funders, and that's now available on our website. You can see the link in the QR code on this slide. We are partnering with TexProtects for this tour so that funders in Texas are aware of the most pressing issues in child welfare and how they can help, and so that they know what reforms are needed as we go into the upcoming legislative session. Our group will be hosting our own policy event in January to kick off the legislative session. And if you're a funder, we'd love for you to participate in that. You can learn more about that through our website and by getting on our mailing list as well. I hope you'll get involved. And I want to thank TexProtects for collaborating with us on this, letting us be involved, and I will pass it off to them.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you to those who have already talked on today. We're so excited that you're here and to spend a little bit of time laying out our legislative priorities, but also hearing from you all and what is most important to you. My name is Brittany Taylor Ross, and I'm the prenatal to 3 policy manager here at TexProtect, and I'm joined by the rest of our policy team, Jordan, who you just heard from, and Carrie Judice, who is our child protection policy manager, as well as Emily Williams, who is our mental health policy fellow. Just a bit of background, we have had the honor and privilege of going to about 8 different communities across the state and hearing from folks just like you over the past few months. And one of the themes that has really echoed loud and clear in these meetings is that there is really an overall lack of support for children and families across the state, and that we really can't just do more of the same. We have to put our investment in keeping families together. So we work together to take this information. We talked with lawmakers, we observed interim hearings at the Capitol to try to figure out what we thought was most feasible and would have the most impact moving into this next legislative session. So we took all of this together to help us land on our official legislative agenda that we are excited to walk through with you all today. So for those of you who might not be familiar with TexProtect, we are the only nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization in Texas that is solely focused on the prevention of child abuse and neglect. And we are also proud to be the Texas chapter of Prevent Child Abuse America. So through research, advocacy, and education, we work to promote smart strategies all along the prevention spectrum that you can see there to hopefully prevent child abuse and neglect from happening at all, but also working on strategies that will help keep families together and prevent removals and really just work for what is in the best interest and safety of children who are in the state's custody. So as I mentioned, we took what you all had to say during our last Texas tour and really looked at the data and research to see what is it telling us. And I think you will see here today that the information that we found really points us to why it is so necessary to better support children and families further upstream and earlier on. So let's go ahead and jump into a little bit of what we found. So as you can see here, as a state, we wanted to look at how are we doing compared to other states and compared to kind of the national average when it comes to caring for our children. So as we all know, Texas loves to be the best and the biggest and the #1, in all things, but we aren't quite there yet when it comes to child protection and supporting families. So according to the State of Babies report, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with from 2022, there are some things that we did well in, and some things that we didn't quite meet the mark in when it comes to serving families in their communities. You can see that Texas as a whole has more children who are uninsured. We have less families receiving support and benefits, and overall just less resilience when it comes to family circumstances in the state. So what does this show us? It really shows us that families, again, and you're going to hear us say this over and over again, but families are really in need of support at the right time, whenever they are most vulnerable. And we really need to be rising to the occasion as a state to help create that safety net for families so that they don't come in contact with the child welfare system if they don't need to. So here's another way that we know that families are in need of these supports. So we know that there are great resource and referral networks available in the state, like 211 resource and referral, and even more localized navigation services like Help Me Grow. But we also know that families continue to call the child abuse and neglect hotline because they just need to be connected to services in their community and they don't know who else to call. So you can see that on the slide here that this is a steady trend. So over the last decade, 4 out of 10 calls to the CPS hotline are just because a family needed a referral in their community. So we also know that the Department of Family and Protective Services has recently launched what they're calling the Parent Helpline to try to turn this trend around and give families and community members a place to go that is not the hotline when they need, maybe some parenting support or access to a specific resource. So we are really curious and excited to see what happens with this trend, with this recent introduction of the Parent Helpline. And now I am going to toss it over to Carrie to get a little bit more in the weeds on this thing.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. I'm actually going to piggyback off of something Jesse said earlier. Again, we know investigations are being closed out statewide without families being referred to the stage of service that is really meant to be that kind of in between for families to help with family preservation and to get them services to keep them together and prevent removals. And so you see on your screen that statewide trend, that's that line on top, where we know that we've seen a significant decrease of those investigations being referred over to FBSS, and Jesse actually gave the percentage, that 80% for Houston. So thanks, Jesse. I don't even know if you knew you were going to set me up for this one. So thank you. I appreciate it. But we are definitely seeing that trend in Houston. It's not necessarily the case in every single county across the state, but it is being seen in most. And again, it's part of that piece where we know families just aren't getting connected to the services that they need. And so again, another reason why we need to rely on communities to kind of step in and help fill that gap. And then very similar here, we also know removals are down statewide. Overall, we've seen removals drop about 40 to 50% in the last year and a half. And some areas, again, have been more impacted than others, but the overall trend is a decrease in kids coming into care. And for Houston, again, it would seem like you guys are following the same statewide trend. And so similar to what you heard me say about FBSS referrals being down, I would say that just because there's not that preponderance of the evidence, that, that piece saying, oh yeah, we've definitely met the burden of proof that's needed to remove a child, it doesn't mean families aren't in need of supports. So again, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but I think y'all get the picture. So there's a lot of speculation as to why these numbers may be down, but the truth is it's kind of hard to pinpoint just one thing because a lot has really changed over the last year and a half. There's been a lot of internal policy changes at the department. For instance, CPS implemented what's called concurrent stages to where there could be, from investigations to FBSS, where they can kind of jointly work a case as soon as they know the family would benefit from services. And we're hearing that this is resulting in cases being closed out sooner, actually. And what we know is that there's also been an internal policy change to require additional approvals for children aged 12 and up to be removed. And so, between those internal policy changes and what we know that happened at the legislature last session, that's where we had the change in neglect definition and the fact that there can no longer be those non-emergency removals. The intent behind all of these things whether it's internal at the department or whether this is something that legislators wanted. It's really for less kids to come into care. But for less kids to come into care, we would have hoped that meant families were being met with the services that they needed in the community to be successful. The verdict is still out on whether or not, a lot of these changes have been more helpful or harmful to families and their children. But what we do know is that they aren't receiving the supports through CPS via FBSS or a removal. And now I'm going to actually pass it over to Emily. She's going to talk a little bit more about in the system. Emily, you are still muted, and you might be having some issues coming on screen. All right. Let's see, I'm going to give her a second here. Appreciate y'all's patience with us. It's one of those things, we're 3 years into the pandemic and we still have those technical difficulties. All right, well, I'm not sure if she's having some issues here, may not be able to hop on. I can kind of jump back in here and talk a little bit more. So this is really what we're seeing, kind of, again, where we're talking about the support issue and like what's happening when kids come into contact with the system. An issue, is the fact that we've been seeing a capacity issue. Children without placement is something you guys have probably heard a lot about in the news or just in general in the circles that you're talking in. So again, children without placement or CWOP. When the state can't find a placement for children who come into CPS care, or maybe because they've disrupted out of their most recent placement, they're taken to some sort of unregulated setting. And that can be for any number of reasons, but they can go into these unregulated settings. They're supervised CPS staff, maybe some folks that they've hired to provide that round-the-clock supervision, but regardless, it's not the most appropriate setting for kids. And the types of kids we're talking about that end up without placement are those with those higher acuity needs. So this pie chart on the right of your screen, it's talking about the kind of setting they were in before the state was unable to find them that appropriate placement for them. And so the way that this may come about is maybe they've been in a psychiatric hospital where they were deemed a danger to themselves or others. Maybe they just returned from runaway status. But alarmingly, a good portion of these youth are, the ones where their parents have relinquished them to the state because they couldn't get them the mental health treatment that they needed in the community. So again, it's that same theme of not being able to get family supports that they need. So, that's something that has been focused on. And then I think if any of you have joined any sort of webinar with TexProtects, y'all have seen this slide that we continue to update over time. Texas is in the middle of a federal lawsuit that has been going on for over a decade. And it continues to show that the state's child protection system continues to place kids at an unreasonable risk of harm. And so the lawsuit has revealed things like overburdensome caseloads, which has resulted into the state agreeing to a caseload of 14 to 17 kids per caseworker. It's also revealed things like kids being placed in settings with long histories of concerning deficiencies, leading to what you guys may be familiar with about like heightened monitoring, more enforcement in the regulatory process. And it's continued to shed a light on the fact that our state is in need of expanding our array of mental health services. So again, lack of supports, it's a continued theme here. So, Texas will continue to be under the scrutiny of the lawsuit until we can make sure that the kids who come into their care aren't experiencing further trauma when they come into CPS care. And then with all of the issues that we've seen going on in this system, there's a lot of pressure to do something different when it comes to foster care. So one way that's being pursued is to move away from a one-size-fits-all state approach to one that's led by each community. So the idea is that communities know their communities best, and can adapt a bit easier because they're smaller than, again, that whole statewide system. So the restructuring, as you guys are probably familiar with, is called community-based care, or CBC. And it formally began back in 2017 with the passing of what you all may know as Senate Bill 11. It seems to be treated as kind of that silver bullet for a fix to the current foster care system. It splits the state into about 16 regions or catchment areas, and the idea is to contract with local providers in those different areas of the state to carry out foster care services. So the areas in blue on your screen are the active areas, and the ones in green are open procurements based on funding and approval based on the last legislative session. And so the Office of Community-Based Care Transition was created as the separate entity from the department to help with the rollout of CBC. And they've since kind of changed the way providers can bid on contracts. Now providers who want to bid on an area can come forward whenever they're ready and propose what areas they want to cover. And so we do know we've gotten a little bit of a glimpse of what the department wants to see, and we'll be advocating for this legislative session. Essentially, they requested funding for 4 new areas. I know if it were up to the legislature, based on how conversations have been going at the Capitol, CBC would be implemented across the state much faster and likely in smaller chunks. So we'll continue watching this. So based on all the information you heard from us, you know, again, the data points in the same direction, the information y'all provided us, you know, last year at this time, and then just generally what we know about what's happening with the system being in this perpetual state of crisis, we know and can confidently say that we need to be providing better supports for children and families all around. And that is what our legislative priorities aim to do in different ways. And so now we're going to get a little bit deeper into each of our priorities, and I'm going to pass it back over to Brittany.
Thank you, Carrie. So of course, they're not a surprise to any of you, but our, really number one ask of the legislature, in this upcoming session is increasing funding for the Prevention and Early Intervention Division of the Department of Family and Protective Services. So we will, of course, be supporting their increased funding request so that we can expand prevention services and ensure that all families that need these services have access to them. So recently, just wanted to give a bit of background because this is really exciting. DFPS released its legislative appropriations request. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the LAR because we know that state agencies love acronyms. And this is really just a document asking the legislature for increased funding for certain items above the base budget. So this is a good way to know kind of what state agencies are going to be prioritizing within their budget. And what we saw in the DFPS LAR is that there really is, a renewed attention and highlighting the importance of prevention services such as home visitation and resource referral and navigation services for families in order to support families with young children. So we were really happy to see within that legislative appropriation request from the department that there is a specific exceptional item request to expand prevention and community well-being services by requesting $85 million over the base budget to expand home visitation programming by 50%, as well as $2.3 million to support marketing and staffing for the Texas Parent Helpline that I mentioned earlier. So I'm highlighting this because this is a substantial and really historic increase in ask in prevention specifically for the department. And again, just really speaks to that larger shift that I think we're seeing, not only, at the state agency level, but also among lawmakers to really support prevention services. So as you can see here on this slide, and I think we've used this slide a few times because it is just really jarring when you see it broken down like this. Currently, the prevention and early intervention services make up just 5% of the DFPS budget in comparison to spending on child protective services. So we really have to prioritize and kind of change our thinking when it comes to offering support for families before a crisis occurs, before they ever come in contact with CPS. So to do this, we know that we are going to have to increase investment in these supportive services, these safety net type services, to make sure that families get access to the resources they need at the right time. So our next prevention legislative priority is to scale and expand universal prenatal and postpartum home visitation programs statewide. So I first want to just take a moment to define what we mean by universal home visitation. So evidence has shown that short-term postpartum home visitation services improve maternal and child health and well-being, while also helping to connect families to the resources and supports they need at this very vulnerable time right after delivery. And universal means that the program is offered to all families, regardless of any income or other eligibility criteria. And I also want to highlight the very important detail that these programs are also voluntary for families. So as you can see on this next slide, about 1 in every 10 children in Texas, about 1 in every 10 children in the US is in Texas. And so we know that we have about 1/10 of the births nationwide here in Texas. We know that this number is going to grow. I'm sure we have all experienced, everyone wants to move to Texas. So we always have, an increase in population that is occurring as more and more families move to Texas. And also just, in light of the recent Dobbs decision, we're going to have more babies and families in Texas that are going to need support and help during this really vulnerable time, right after delivery, right after adding a new member to their family. So again, we know that there are a lot of young children and families in Texas. So who actually has access to these prevention services as it stands right now? So we have about 1.8 million families in Texas with children under the age of 6. And about 400,000 of these families may benefit from home visiting type services when you really look at a few specific risk factors. But we know that currently less than 5% of families who could benefit from these home visitation services are actually receiving it. In the Houston area, about 2,500, I would love it if it was 25,000, 2,500 families were served through home visitation type services, specifically through the Prevention and Early Intervention Division of DSPS in 2021. So what do we know about these prevention programs offered through PEI, or the Prevention and Early Intervention Division? So I wanted to look at just a few outcomes from 2 home visitation programs that are offered already in Texas that are funded through PEI. So Family Connect, which is a universal postpartum home visitation program, very similar to what I just described, where a nurse comes to visit a family within the first 2 weeks after delivery, just to make sure that the family is connected to any resources and referrals that they need in their community. And also Parents as Teachers, which has been around for a long time. And I know that most of you probably already know, but really just helping families, parents understand that they are their child's first teacher and helping them to create curriculum around that. So as you can see here with the Family Connect program, families saw a 30% reduction in maternal postpartum depression and anxiety, 50% fewer infant emergency medical visits within the first year, and 44% fewer CPS investigations at 2 years of age, and 39% fewer CPS investigations at 5 years. So that is something I really want to highlight there, that really dramatic decrease in child maltreatment rates. And then with Parents as Teachers, we see a 22% decreased likelihood of child maltreatment substantiations, and 50% fewer cases of suspected abuse or neglect. So again, just really highlighting the decrease in child maltreatment rates with both of these programs. So we know that these home visitation programs offer successful outcomes for families, and they work to connect families to resources and referrals in their communities that they need. So we did have a similar piece of legislation and budget rider supporting this legislative priority last session that was championed by Representative Donna Howard This bill seemed to have a lot of bipartisan support around it. It just didn't quite make it to the finish line. So we're really excited to move forward again with this legislative priority and try to get it to the finish line. So hopefully Emily is back now. I'm going to turn it over to her for our next prevention priority. Emily, are you on?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank the Lord. All right, guys, I'm so sorry for those issues earlier. So we've spoke a lot about prevention with home visitation and other services, and now I'd like to speak on prevention just a little bit more in regards to our ACEs priority. As most of you know, our aim with this bill is to make strides in improving the delivery of prevention services and increase the availability of these services so that all families and children from all backgrounds can access them in order to prevent ACEs from happening in the first place. And here on this slide, we have a glimpse at the prevalence of ACEs in Texas. This is from the National Survey of Children's Health. I will say, however, that the survey is based on parent self-report, and it doesn't include questions about child abuse and neglect. So even these numbers likely underestimate the actual incidence of ACEs. So there's a lot here, so feel free to read this slide while I touch on just a couple. The highest percentage comes from children that have experienced the divorce or separation of a parent, as approximately 1.8 million children have experienced a divorce or separation of a parent. And that makes up about 1/4 of children in Texas. The second highest was the 12.4% that reported that they had difficulty paying for food and housing from their household income, and that was reported at somewhat often. While this data is crucial to understanding the prevalence, I want to remind everyone that these numbers make up hundreds of thousands of children's real life experiences. And on our next slide here, we know that often adverse childhood experiences can also be traumatic experiences. And we also know that trauma can increase the likelihood of negative outcomes across the lifespan development. Trauma poses great risk to mothers and babies as it can increase health risks during pregnancy and cause preterm births and low birth weight. It can also cause significant deficits in brain development, such as cognitive impairment. And it has been proven to increase the likelihood of someone experiencing a chronic disease, such as diabetes, cancer, and others. In the school and work settings, we often see children being expelled from school, having a higher academic failure rate, and adults losing time at work to seek treatment. And lastly, we know that there is an increased rate of participating in risky behavior, such as substance abuse, violence against others, and unsafe or risky sexual practices. So now let's look at some of the economic impacts of ACEs. So TexProtects estimates that in 2019, Texas spent approximately $52.9 billion on the lifetime cost of confirmed child maltreatment cases. Some of the most staggering numbers come from the national health spending cost, with about $168 billion for illicit drug use and $160 billion annually for smoking. So research does show that reducing trauma within families can lead to better financial outcomes later. And those who experience 4 or more ACEs across their lifespan are 1.6 times more likely to live in poverty as an adult than those who have not experienced ACEs. So in 2019, about 1.5 million children were living in poverty. So this ranks Texas at about 40 out of the 50 states when it comes to the overall poverty rate. So of all of the issues I've mentioned here today, these are all reasons why we push this ACEs bill. This bill will help us connect with stakeholders and communities across Texas to better identify what is working and what is really not to tackle the cause of childhood adversity. It will give state agencies back community guidance to better identify strategies to increase effectiveness of state prevention dollars. We can then use these findings to propose recommendations to the next legislator so that we can continue to do what works, stop what doesn't, and make children and families strong. So that wraps up our ACEs priority. I'll now pass it to Carrie.
All right, thanks, Emily. All right, so next up we have kinship. So I'll just kind of start with what our ultimate goal is. We would like to see more children placed with relatives by making sure these caregivers have the supports that they need. And we actually have two strategies that we're going to be pushing. You see one of them on the screen, but I'll jump in here. So first, let's just kind of start with some definitions to make sure we're on the same page. So what do we mean when we say kinship or kin? We're talking about relatives or friends of the family who step in and care for a child when it's unsafe for them to remain in the home of their parents. So we know relatives step in and care for kids in all kinds of scenarios. When kin steps in and provides care for a child in their home when CPS doesn't have custody, that is called an informal kinship placement. And then there's kin that step in and care for a child when the state has custody. And these are referred to as formal kinship placements. So we'll get a little bit deeper into these, but I just wanted to kind of start with some of the basics to make sure we're on the same page. So you heard me mention we have two strategies. One that's focused on informal kinship placements and one that is focused on formal kinship placements. So for informal, what we have heard is that there are two main barriers, financial and legal. When the state doesn't have custody, there's no financial assistance from the department nor any legal standing for an informal kinship caregiver to make decisions on the child's behalf. So to address this, we want to see a pilot program developed that would ensure the relatives are provided and connected to both legal and financial supports in order to prevent a removal. I do want to go ahead and say, I saw Jody was on this call. I know DePelchin's doing some great stuff on the Family First kinship navigator stuff. And honestly, I wish that existed everywhere across the state, but this is part of what we are looking to advocate for so that we can again, make sure those informal placements are cared for and have the supports that they need. And we want to make sure that a case manager is assigned to the relative caregiver who can help them get the resources that they need. And ideally, a court would be involved. So that's kind of part of our vision for this pilot, so that they can help make sure that some sort of legal standing is in place if the case is dismissed, with the child remaining in the home of the relative. And so then for those kids who do end up being removed and placed in a formal kinship placement, these placements have the option to become licensed or not. For those who choose to not become licensed, we want to make sure that those relatives are receiving pay parity in line with what foster parents receive for the duration of the time that a child is placed in their home. And as you can see on your screen here, we know that it's a priority of the department to place with relatives, and at least 43% of kids in CPS care were placed with kin across the different regions in Texas. But when we're really looking into the numbers, there's really only a small percentage of relatives who actually decide to get licensed. So the number at the end of August of 2021 showed that only a little over 8% of those homes become licensed. And so anecdotally, we've heard a slew of reasons as to why this could be. Maybe it's something in their criminal history check from a long time ago. Sometimes it can be family dynamics that are just hard to navigate, or even just someone not wanting to be under that much regulation. So let's take a look, though. I do want you guys to see, what supporting formal kinship placements has looked like over time. You can see more support has been provided over the years. TexProtects was actually behind the movement back in the 85th legislative session, so back in 2017, that helped relatives receive more than just a stipend, but instead receive up to 1/2 of what a licensed caregiver receives for up to 12 months. And so, that's what we're really wanting to kind of hone in on, is what that current statute says. And we'll get into that in a second, but I just don't want to move past this here when we're talking about supports. Brittany had talked about the LAR earlier. I do want to just put on y'all's radar that we were glad to see that the department actually put in their LAR an additional $6 million ask for relatives. Part of that is to provide up to $1,000 to kinship caregivers to meet immediate and concrete needs. And it's also, that could include also a $750 reimbursement for those that want to go through the licensure process. So when I say pay parity, what do I mean by that? What are the components of it? I just want to break those down. So this session, we want to continue to move the needle forward and achieve pay parity. And You heard us talk about the 85th legislature and what that statute kind of read. So this is what we feel like we need to open up and change. So first of all, the 12-month limit has to go. We want to ensure that relative caregivers receive compensation for the entire time a child is placed in their home. We also need to remove that 50% cap. And there's also another piece of this that we need to decouple the reimbursement rate. There's some language in there about the basic daily rate. We need to decouple it from that current rate methodology system because we know that there's some changes coming to that rate methodology in the future. And lastly, we have heard stories where some placements aren't approved because maybe they fail a home study, but later a court approves them. Either way, the child is in their home. And so what we've been hearing is that sometimes those placements, because they weren't approved by DFPS, aren't getting the reimbursement. And so we want to make sure that is not an issue moving forward, and that regardless of who approves the placement, if the child remains in the home, that they're getting that assistance. And so we're thrilled to know we aren't alone in advocating to better support kin across the board this session. I've seen a couple of other advocates on the call that I know who are working on kinship things as well. And so, but I do just want to be clear with this particular priority that we're not trying to disincentivize relatives from becoming licensed if they want to or are able to. We, like others, want to make sure that they're better, we're just better supporting kin all along the spectrum, and that includes those that can't or may not want to become licensed. So now I'm going to move into our next priority, which is data. This is not new. This is something that we're continuing from last session. When we talk about this priority, though, I just want to make sure that we all know what we're talking about is that real-time data that's made available to the public. And ultimately, the goals in this are to increase transparency, accountability, and effectiveness. It's important that we make sure that critical child protection information is updated and published monthly, not annually like has historically been the case with the department. And so you guys heard me talk about how we have this system that's rapidly moving from that, one size fits all state approach to one that's more community driven. And we know, we know that these providers are going to need to know where changes are needed, what's going well, what isn't. And so that people that are doing the work, those providers on the ground, are making decisions and are able to make decisions in an effective way. And so that's kind of what this goal is getting at. I'm just going to give you guys a glimpse. If you guys haven't checked out where this stuff lives on the department's website, it's really great. This is a screenshot. And then we also included the link there. And then what you're seeing on the right side of your screen is just to show you guys that any of these that you click on, there's a filter where you can go into exact month and year. They not only are just doing this moving forward, they've done it retrospectively as well. But just in case you're wondering, okay, well, Carrie, if they're doing it already, why are you coming back and asking for it? Well, last session, of course, we had pushed a bill and that didn't pass, but we were able to get this information into the budget with a rider. And so instead of us coming back every 2 years to make sure that that rider sticks, we want to get this into statute so that the information will continue, because it really has been helpful. As you even could see through some of the slides that we've shown, having some of that monthly information is really able to help us show trends. And then last, but definitely not least, we have a workforce priority. When we say workforce, I just, again, want to make sure we're on the same page about it. So those frontline workers, whether that's investigators, alternative response workers, FBSS workers, conservatorship workers, that's who we're talking about. And the goal is to ensure we have high quality workers all the way up the career ladder, not just on the ground, but in positions of leadership too. So we think that this has to be tackled from several angles. So recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotion. So let's kind of talk about those first few, which is the recruitment, hiring, and retention. How do we get people to be interested in working for the state? And then once they get there, how do we get them to stay? On this slide, you're clearly seeing workforce turnover, and those numbers have gone up. We see 40% for investigators, 21% for conservatorship. We know it's an issue, and I'm sure all of you have read in the news about the mass exodus from the department. And so this is what, this is what the community hears and sees. When we hear about the pressure the agency's under and the negative stories in the news, what's going to attract people to work there? What's going to attract the right people, the high quality workers to work there? So we know pay is a factor in getting workers to feel valued and ultimately want to stay. You all may remember that TexProtects was behind the pay raises in 2017, and we're glad to see that the department also put in their LAR a 10% salary raise for frontline workers. But we know we have to consider more than just pay, because it's just one piece of the puzzle. But how do we promote a better culture and ensure workers are not overburdened? So I wanted to do a little digging into, that promotion piece. How do we get people to promote? And so part of what we looked into was just this differential between the different, like whether you're a worker, then you move up into a supervisor position, and then program director and up. And so, the state auditor's office actually says that pay is in line with what others with similar jobs in the field are making. But we really know what we're hearing a lot of is just the benefits may be lost. So for instance, we know in some positions, say investigators, they lose their stipend. If you move up on the CPS side to become a program director or administrator, you lose the ability to get paid out for your overtime and actually earn overtime. Also, the further you move up, you're kind of more stuck to your desk a little bit if you're not a frontline worker. And so therefore, if you were relying on that travel check, that's not something you're going to have quite as much. So we've also just heard generally that, sometimes it's just not wanting to take that additional responsibility. Maybe the compensation just isn't quite where it needs to be for the amount of responsibility that people would take on. So, benefits, pay, what else really needs to be addressed? And so, y'all heard me kind of lay out, it's the high quality piece that we're after. We don't really want just a warm body. We're not looking to just fill a position with anybody. We want to make sure that when we're talking about a workforce that's making life-altering decisions for children and families, that we've got the right people in the right seats all the way up the chain. And so what our idea moving forward is, there's already a human resource management plan that they do it really just focuses on retention. We want to expand it to consider more than just retention. We want the department to also make recommendations for how to recruit, hire, retain, and promote that high quality workforce. So having the department go through that exercise to figure out what's needed will help set all of us advocates up better for the next session to know what to advocate for. So now you have heard us kind of lay out our, let's see. So you've heard us lay out our priorities. Now we're going to move into our breakouts. So really, we want to hear from you all what we need to know going into session. What's the context that we need to know about our priorities? Are there updates we need to be aware of? Do you have information that could be helpful? Are you guys working on any of these topics? And so we can know how to support each other. And then are there folks on here that are like, yes, sign me up. I want to come alongside you guys and fight for these things next session. So the way this is going to work, we're going to have two breakout sessions, one that's going to be more upstream prevention focus, another that's downstream, more system involvement. And so, and then you see on your screen kind of more of the specific topics we'll be talking about in each one. So we're going to have until 11:20, so a good solid 30 minutes. And so you guys, please pick the breakout session that makes the most sense for you based on what you do, your knowledge and expertise, what you're most interested in. And then come join us. And then, like I said, at 11:20, we'll be brought back to the main room. For us, these are really helpful for us to be able to know, get more context on the things that we're working on, to hear from you guys, because you guys really are the ones doing the work on the ground. And so I just want to say how invaluable the information is to us. So thank you so much. But now I want to kind of talk about how can we continue to connect on the work we're doing? How can y'all know what we're up to? Things like that. Is everybody seeing my screen, by the way? Yeah, okay. So here's a very simple thing. Go to our website. There's a box that literally looks like this on our webpage that you can put in your information. And this is a way for you guys to sign up basically for our emails and advocacy alerts. And these are ways that we can push out information to you guys when we're doing stuff. So whether that's lunch and learns that we're doing on kinship or data or prevention, whether that's, during the legislative session when some of these bills that you've heard us talking about are moving in ways that you guys can maybe reach out to your legislators or somehow go like, hey, I really want to help. How can I help? This is how you guys can know what is going on. And so, like I said, super easy there. If for some reason you have trouble, reach out to any of us. We are going to be sending out the slides today, or I say today, we're going to be sending out the slides that we presented today, as well as a copy of the recording, which will also have our contact information at the end. So like I said, if you guys run into any technical difficulty signing up for this stuff, reach out to anybody on our team. And so this is where, again, how can we kind of continue to stay involved, especially when it comes to the priorities that we laid out for you guys today. There's several ways to get plugged in. I see we have at least one legislative staffer joining us today. Hi, Grayson. And so I, want to just say that, as session moves throughout the, hopefully just January to May, I think that's what everybody's hoping. There are ways that we're going to be pushing out, whether it's our one-pagers or ledge agendas or different reports that we have, just different information. So like, again, first step is, let me just make sure that I'm signed up to get this information. But then there's ways that you guys, as we continue to move throughout the session, can join our efforts, whether that's talking to legislative offices, whether that's sharing different social media posts that our comms team does such a great job of putting out there, whether that's maybe joining us for a meeting or also advocating when you're going up there and advocating for other things. There's just a lot of different ways to get involved. And sometimes it's simple. If you're super introverted and you're going, Carrie, please don't make me go and have a meeting. That's scary. We also have advocacy alerts where I'm sure you guys have probably, in some way, whether it's personally or professionally engaged with those in different ways, and it'll just kind of be a way for you guys to literally be able to do it from your computer from the safety of your home. So those are definitely some ways to get involved. And then we wouldn't be doing our job well if we don't resource you well. This is just a handful of things that we have available, and we will continue to have more. But these are just some of the things that might be of interest to you guys. Y'all saw that we laid out some data today. That State of the State report is the most recent one. We'll put out another one when we get the 2022 numbers next year. But the numbers there in that State of the State goes in a little bit more detail, not just the things we listed out today, but has some more good information in there. So check that out. We also have our flow chart. So if any of you are like, okay, I know my particular area, but I don't really know how all of these things kind of flow together. These flow charts really can help kind of make the system feel not so gigantic and unapproachable. It actually makes it a little bit easier. We also have a CPS 101 that we did, that we partnered with actually the Texas Child Welfare Funders, our sponsors for the event. So if you guys are just like, hey, what are the big issues going on when kids are removed and placed in state custody? What do I need to know? And, I think Brittany kind of made the joke earlier about how we love our acronyms. And so these also kind of go into some of the things that you may be hearing in the news lately. And then along this kind of the bottom part of your screen, you're seeing we've got like an advocacy toolkit. We've got more information, more in-depth ACEs impact. Y'all heard Emily touch on those a little bit earlier. This report goes a little bit deeper. And then our recommendations on how to transform the system. And then let's see. Oh, yeah. Of course, we just want to thank everybody today. Thank you to our wonderful partners over at DePelchin. We've had so many iterations of this Texas tour with you guys. It's always a privilege and an honor to host these with you guys. And thank you again to our sponsors, the Texas Child Welfare Funders. I don't know if Christine is still on, but if she is, thank you for joining us today. And then of course, last but not least, thank you all who took some time out of your day to join us and hear what we're working on, but also be able to provide some insight that can be helpful. And then we've got our contact page. So if you need whether that's, hey, Carrie, those resources were really helpful. Do you have more of that? Or, hey, I'd love to hear more about this home visiting strategy that y'all are working on. Reach out to us. We would love to have further conversations with you all. And so we've got our phone numbers and our emails on here, so please don't hesitate to reach out. So I'm actually going to give you guys back a couple of minutes, but thank you again for joining us, and we hope to talk to you all soon and continue to join arms as we go into session.